Hey everybody, it's Eugene Lee Show. I'm a 3D forensic analyst at AI23D, and today we are going to do our episode 6 of Forensics Talks. Before I do that, just one very quick announcement, and that is that there is the IABPA conference, the Bloodstain Pattern Analysis Conference, which is going to be coming up on November 16th to 20th. It's a virtual conference, so if you go to iabpa.org, you'll be able to sign up for that. We're going to get started right away here, and our guest today is Grant Fredericks. Grant is a certified forensic video analyst and an instructor at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, as a contractor. Grant is a former police officer and coordinator of the Vancouver Police Forensic Video Unit in Canada. He's testified over 300 times in courts throughout the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and other parts of the world. Grant's primary focus is on or in the evaluation of video evidence for use of force investigation, and he currently trains investigators on strategies and techniques for the accurate interpretation of video evidence, including tracking the movements of targets captured to proprietary digital video. He's a frequent speaker at conferences, and he has a wealth of knowledge, and I'm very pleased to have him here today. Grant, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, Eugene. Thanks very much for the invitation.
All right. Hey, the first thing, so you were a police officer before, and you've obviously made somewhat of a career change, but I'm interested to ask you about how you got started and, what your interests were and how you sort of got into from policing off into video forensics.
Well, my background is my undergraduate degree is in television. I worked in television for a few years before becoming a police officer. And because I was the only person in the department that knew how to spell video, when we had video evidence recovered from crime scenes, I'd get pulled off the road and was asked, hey, what can we do with this? Prior to joining the police department, I was involved in a number of forensic video projects, working on homicide cases as an independent expert. That's sort of what got me involved and interested in policing. So once I started working these cases for the department, and I went through various positions from being a canine officer to working major crime, I then got pulled into the major crime office to see could we put together a full-time forensic video unit to service the growing need to examine video evidence. Based on that, we formed a forensic video unit and move forward developing kind of new techniques in Canada, techniques that were adopted in many other parts of the United States and in fact the rest of the world. So we kind of started walking and went to a full run, by the mid 1980s to late 90s. The whole industry was changing dramatically, and virtually every case at that time was likely touched by video evidence.
So, you're talking about the 90s and that sort of time. How strong or how well known was forensic video analysis back in the 90s? Like, was it something that was definitely, everybody was on top of this thing, everybody was familiar with it, and of course the technology has changed too since then. So were you sort of like one of the early people jumping on this thing? Was there a lot of people? I'm asking a lot of questions here, but
sure. No, it's fair. I think that I was likely one of the earlier adopters of the examination of video in a forensic way to look at criminal cases. The Law Enforcement and Emergency Services Video Association, which is kind of the preeminent organization for certification for video analysts. Back in 1994, when I first became involved with that group, they were primarily a group of people who worked for police agencies, primarily civilians, who were producing training videos to train police officers. That was their mandate. When I became involved with that group, I found some like-minded people who were interested in developing forensic standards and working with video in a very different way to assist courts, to assist investigators. The organization, LEVA, began to migrate from purely a training organization to a forensic video group. Now, 100% of the people involved in that group are now doing video examinations for forensic purposes. And, there's probably close to 1,000 active people in that group who work for police agencies. There are also some private people who are part of the LEVA organization. So when I started, I think I was probably one of 2 or 3 or 4 individuals within the organization that were actually looking at video from a forensic perspective. And now, of course, that's changed.
Right. And at what point did you start actually training? Because you do a lot of training, a lot of speaking. You're out there all the time and sort of at the forefront of all this stuff. I mean, was it once you sort of went on the private side, or what prompted you to go on your own?
Well, I started training in about 1994. I was a police officer in Canada. I was a member of the LEVA organization, beginning to introduce them to the concept of working with video from a forensic perspective. And I remember the first presentation that I did in 1994. Everybody had their, eyes wide open. They had no idea that video could be used this effectively. So that was the first time that I was involved in training for that group. In 1998, I took over as the lead instructor, and at that time it was all forensics. And I worked as lead instructor for about 14 years. While I was also still a police officer. And then after I left policing, I went into the private industry. So that my training continues to this day. I take a lot of courses, but I'm also continuing to train. LEVA has a new cadre of very good, excellent instructors. And I'll still take part in the annual conferences, but I pulled back from the regular training with LEVA because I'm just so busy with my private practice.
Yeah, sure. Let me ask you about the technology, because I'm interested in the kinds of things that have changed over the years. Now, of course, everyone knows video is just more prolific. Everybody's got in their cameras and everywhere else. But in terms of the changes that have happened over the years, has it helped? Has it complicated things more? In your view, sort of, is it helping or hurting?
Well, it's helping, but absolutely, it's far more complicated today than it ever was. So, originally, we were working in an analog world. We had VHS tape and SVHS tape. And that really was the sole source of video evidence. There was a standard in the United States that everybody used. There was really just one way to process the video properly. That changed. The migration from analog to digital in about the mid-2000s was a complete sea change in the industry. The introduction of codecs, proprietary players. Each manufacturer had their own way of producing video images. The changes in MPEG technology, that's kind of the primary, most common video codec that we see in the format that we see. Within multiple codecs within that format, it becomes very, very challenging. So the video analyst today needs to have hundreds of times more knowledge than we used to have in an analog world.
Yeah, that makes sense. And on some of the cases that I've been working on, I'm seeing a lot more in-car camera. We're getting a lot of more body camera type stuff. People with, of course, their cell phones and that sort of thing, which in many ways is really good quality compared to some of the things I've worked with before. But what about other sources of video? So, for example, are you starting to see like media? Are you starting to see other sources that you typically wouldn't think of?
Well, we see all sources, and I think we need to expect that the proliferation of video in our society today means that every device that can collect an image is going to collect the image, from cell phones, body-worn camera, in-car video, but also to your, mom and pop grocery stores, even up to satellite surveillance, and certainly, to some degree, the media. I think that the biggest challenge today for video analysts is to understand that proprietary video systems, CCTV systems that are in place in your mom and pop grocery stores, your Ring doorbells, video cameras that are across the street at another business or a bank, they're all proprietary. They don't talk to each other. There are right ways of collecting that evidence and examining it, and there are very wrong ways of collecting that evidence. And it can completely change the meaning of that visual information if it's not collected correctly. So it does create myriad of challenges depending on the source of that video evidence.
Yeah. I was thinking, there's two sides to this. There's the hardware and the fact that we're collecting it. And then there's also software and the way that you analyze and sort of do the interpretation. And we've all heard the saying, a picture, is it tell you 1,000 words, all that sort of thing. But in thinking about it, video can be very helpful, but it also can be very deceiving. And so I wonder if you can comment on that a little bit.
Well, it actually can be more deceiving than helpful. And I say that because if it's used incorrectly, then not only is it not helpful to the trier of fact, the judge, the jury, but it's deceptive and it will lead the case in a different direction. And so if a case is presented incorrectly based on the video evidence because it's been misinterpreted, then that's obviously a travesty. And it could lead to wrongful convictions, which we see more often today than we used to see. The examination interpretation of the video evidence is critical before an investigator gets the video. That investigator needs to be told by an expert what the video images mean. So you started talking about the old adage that an image is worth 1,000 words. We also hear that the video is the silent witness that speaks for itself. That interpretation, that statement actually came out of a Supreme Court of Canada ruling that has been adopted in the United States in some cases a number of years ago when video was analog. The concept that video speaks for itself is probably the most egregious introduction of an argument that I have heard in court as I testify today, because video does not speak for itself. If the video, depending on how it's been captured, colors are not presented correctly, shapes are not presented correctly. Oftentimes the video is not acquired accurately, images will be dropped. When images are dropped, when we look at force issues, as an image is dropped and the images become squished together but played back in a uniform time, it gives the illusion of increased speed, which is always interpreted as increased force. And I've been involved in a number of those cases where the video has been misinterpreted based primarily on force, shape, timing, and a number of other issues. So interpretation is critical. The inexperienced investigator needs assistance from a video analyst before they use the video for any real purpose.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of cases, there's hundreds of cases you worked on, but the one that sticks out for me locally is the case in Ottawa, where there was a person who police were trying to apprehend, and there was something that happened, and I can't remember if he got really hurt, but I think he may even have
he died.
He died as a result. Yeah, and there was a big issue surrounding the video and the way it was captured in that particular case. And I were you involved in that? Is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, I can comment on it because my involvement is over and it's all been it's all covered by the media. I was hired by the attorney working for the police officer for his defense. And the first thing I was asked to do is to examine how the prosecutor is using that video. And as I examined that process, I discovered how it was recovered. The recovery methodology was the wrong methodology to use. The investigators who did the recovery of the video had never taken a video class. They did not know anything about video evidence. They thought they were doing it correctly. What they did is they produced an exhibit that dropped multiple images throughout the event and in critical areas. And in dropping those images and then playing that video back in a 30 frame per second mode, which was not real time, it gave the illusion that there was excessive force because they missed the intermediate images that showed that there was no contact. And the issue was when the man was taken to the ground, how hard did he hit his head? And the video, when you played it back incorrectly, it played back too fast. It looked like he smacked his head on the ground. When you actually recovered all the real images, you could see that his head actually did not come in contact with the ground at all. The death was caused by something different than what they opined it was. So when I was asked to look at the video, I asked for the original data, the data that was recorded and encoded in the DVR, the digital video recording system. That wasn't what the investigators relied on. They did a screen capture, which is one of the worst things you could do. So I had the original data. it has some flaws to it, but it was significantly more reliable. It had so many more images than what was initially produced by the investigators that the prosecutor was relying on for the prosecution. So when I went to court, I was able to demonstrate side by side, here is what the prosecutor was using. Here is the original. Here's how different it looked in shape, size. The prosecutor had it stretched too wide. And then here's all the images that were missing. And here is the timing between images. That gave a completely different perspective. And it obviously changed their case.
Yeah, and frame rates for speed and timing and all these things are really important when you're making a quantitative analysis, obviously.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about Input Ace, and that's a software package that you know very well. Actually, Andrew, who is your son, is the driving force behind it. It's interesting that you were doing services, like you guys were, doing the video analysis and everything. But I'm curious. Maybe this is a question for him too. But I'm curious what prompted him to say, you know what, we need a tool here that does this kind of stuff. And the only thing that I can think of is, I know there's a lot of when you talk to a forensic video analyst, it's like they have a Bible of different software packages that they use and free software and all this sort of thing. So was it about just bringing it all together in one package, or is there any comments you can say on that?
Well, initially, that's how it started. So at the beginning of the development of that product 4 or 5 years ago, in our office, and Andrew was one of my certified forensic video analysts. I had certified analysts and technicians, all certified by LEVA. We were very, very busy working on proprietary digital video evidence from cases throughout the world. And every single one of these cases started off as a research project. That was sort of the mantra. When we brought in a new case, we had an analyst and the technician work together on the video to determine, number one, how best to play this video. What exactly is it? What's the format? What's the codec? What's the proper dimensions and all the metadata examination that had to be done? We used multiple tools to do that. We used multiple tools because we wanted to validate what we were doing. A lot of the processes became manual. They were very, very detailed, very time-consuming. Andrew began to develop, through his research, techniques to automate some of this and to begin to bring in sometimes freeware tools. Sometimes he would actually write code to develop an automated way to do some of these very, very complicated processes. Based on that, we had the foundation for Input Ace. It wasn't called Input Ace at the time. We were the only ones using it. We began to show this to our peers. They became very excited. They tested it against other tools, and it was, working perfectly for what it was needed to do at that time. We began training about how to do very advanced forensic video analysis with this tool and with others. Based on the interest from this product, we began to develop it so that we could then provide it to other analysts. We had so much requests for upgrades and additional capabilities that we began to then put it into a real package. So about 4 years ago, it went to market. It was peer reviewed by about 60 certified forensic video analysts who put it through thousands of cases before we released it. So right now, I believe there's 1,000 or 2 police agencies that are using the tool. And it is, my go-to for every case I do. I still have validation tools that I use in the background, but it's the primary tool that I use for all of my training and my casework today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a certified forensic video analyst, but I use Input Ace so that I know when I need a forensic video analyst, if that makes any sense. So I can look at it deep enough to say, I've got a problem here. I need to call somebody. And I think for that, it's just a really reliable and useful tool, which is great.
Well, the basic thing that it does for people who are not video analysts primarily is it just plays everything. So all these proprietary players out there, they obfuscate their evidence. They want you to use their proprietary player with their particular codecs. all they're doing is they're hiding the actual data. So Input Ace is able to get past all of that obfuscation and then show the raw video. A lot of players, if they're not designed correctly, they have committed to a little window that they have to crush their video into. And even though they obfuscate how to play it, they also don't play it with the correct shape, and they often drop images. So even when we have the proprietary player from a lot of these digital systems, they're not displaying the video accurately. And they're dropping images, and their timing is off because their obfuscation has errors. So we go kind of bypass the way they hide the video and get to the essence of it. And that's really the power of Input Ace. You can have 1,000 video clips in 10 different folders, grab all the folders into the file list of Input Ace, and you'll immediately get access to all the video in each of the folders, and it maintains the folder hierarchy. The really cool thing about it too is that you can infuse metadata into your video evidence. So you can add witness information and suspect information to descriptions and height analysis and all of the features that you want in a video examination. You can infuse into that data, and then it's all searchable.
Right.
So we designed it for the kind of work that we needed in our office.
One of the features in Input Ace is the camera match tool, where you can do things like calculate speed, but also suspect height, do an analysis on what you can estimate a person's height is. And a little while ago, you were featured on one of the episodes of Netflix, which was called Exhibit A, and I'll bring it up here in a second. How did you get involved with the case first and then Netflix, or how did that go? How did you first get involved with that?
Well, I was hired by the Innocence Project in Texas to look at an old conviction that occurred about 9 years earlier. And that case resulted in the conviction of a man who turned out to be innocent. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. When I was asked to look at it, I was actually contacted first by the Texas Forensic Science Commission. This is a government agency for the legislature in Texas that were looking at junk science. And they wanted to know how this case got to court. The guy was still in jail. They had complaints from the family to say that it couldn't be him for these reasons. They had an expert who provided evidence after the case was over that was completely contrary to the prosecutor's case. So the legislature was concerned about, how do we have two qualified experts, the person working for the prosecution and now this other expert, come to a completely different opinion about height. In fact, they were 7 inches off, which is absolutely ridiculous. So I was hired as an independent expert for the government. I did my examination, my analysis, put in my report. The analysis included 2 different methodologies. After that went through, the Texas Forensic Science Commission were very disturbed by the errors made during the prosecutor's case 9 years earlier. They then sent my report and their report through to the Texas Innocence Project. I was then hired by the Texas Innocence Project to assist them in evaluating all the video evidence and then eventually presenting it to a hearing for an appellant hearing to toss out the conviction and have him released. And then Netflix, after that was all done, Netflix contacted my client at the Innocence Project and asked if I would be involved, and they asked me to do that. So that's how that involvement came. It was long after it was over.
Right. Oh, it's really super interesting. For those that are interested, if you just do a search on Netflix for Exhibit A, it's actually, I believe, the very first episode. And
I think episode of the last season, I think, was first episode.
Oh, okay. The last season. Okay. I saw it. I knew it was first on one of the lists, but I'd watched it some time ago. The other thing that I want to ask about is it's something that actually we're working on right now. So it's kind of a timely question for me. And that has to do with other modes of color, because you mentioned color is an issue. But I want to talk about infrared and thermal. And I'm curious as to how many times you have to deal with some of the effects of those. And I'm kind of asking this because I know there's one case for sure that we worked on together where thermal came up. But I'm curious about what kind of issues come up when you're using a different source of light and not just regular visible light.
Well, it's extremely common. The near infrared is more common than thermal infrared. I started working with thermal infrared in Vancouver when I put together the helicopter project, helicopter surveillance, and we had a dual sensor. One was optical, and the other one was thermal. And the thermal infrared works at different frequencies depending on what we're trying to see. We don't see thermal infrared in regular CCTV, crime video. We get that, from other sources primarily. Near infrared is extremely common, and our cameras, that basically every camera that we have out there that's a color camera, has an infrared filter. That infrared filter, which is always active during daytime, blocks out a frequency of energy. We don't call it light. It's outside of the human visual system. So red, green, and blue. We are right in the middle of the electromagnetic spectrum. Our eyes can sense that frequency of color. Just outside of that, beyond the red, is near infrared. We are not sensitive to that. Cameras are. So the filter blocks that frequency so that we can still see color in daytime. Once the camera technology, the sensor in the camera detects that the light levels have gone down to a specific degree, depending on the manufacturer, the infrared filter is removed, and it allows that frequency in. And the color interpretation of the video signal is also removed to prevent noise. At that point, we get the infrared information into the camera that is then processed by the camera in the encoding system. But what it does is it sees a frequency of energy outside of color. In fact, in very, very dark areas, it appears to give us bright information. But it has a profound impact on the perception of color. We call it tonal values of clothing and of other things. So the interpretation of the color of clothing under infrared conditions is a very, very common tool or common thing that we have to do.
That's interesting, because that's a project with an intern student that I had last year, and actually we're continuing on this year to look at these types of things. One of the problems we're having, though, is trying to quantify the changes. We can see the cause and effect of going into infrared, but it's very difficult to sort of figure out what will happen or whatever. It's difficult to calculate, and just because there's so many different types of fabrics and blends and dyes that react differently under infrared.
Well, you'll find that synthetic fabrics, will reflect the infrared frequency, and when it reflects that frequency, it appears lighter in color. Organic fabrics, will absorb it, so that it all depends on the makeup of the fabric. It could have a combination of everything. You're also dependent on two other things. You're dependent on the sensitivity of the camera. When does it turn into infrared? You're also dependent on the illumination. So the camera will have diodes. Those are infrared diodes that send out this energy to the area. Depends on their power, how far that signal goes. Then you're also dependent on the codec, how the video images are being compressed. So I don't know if you could ever come up with here is at what point it turns to, an infrared sensitivity and how it's going to reflect off of clothing. Each case, I think, will be different, but you'll have the basic formation of understanding of, how infrared works.
Right. I want to ask you a question about something that popped into my mind. So last year, before the whole COVID thing, and we were actually in person at conferences and such, yes. There was a gentleman who presented. And he was from Boston, so he presented on the Boston bombings, and he was part of I think he led part of the forensic IDENT team. But one of the stories that he told was when they had to review the video, they had like partnering agencies, and they had all kinds of people coming together and handling massive amounts of video. And I'm just thinking about this. I wouldn't know where to start. And I'm wondering, I mean, you've had some experience working with large amounts of video, for example, if there's riots or, large amounts of people. And, in the case of a marathon, there's tons of people around. You got to figure out who's who and who's moving around. How do you manage large or video with a ton of people, but plus you also have to manage a large team of people? Like, what can you say about that?
Well, the Boston bombing is a little bit different than I think large riot type cases, because the Boston bombing, at the end of the day, They knew where the bomb went off, right?
Mhm.
Everybody can see it. They just rewound the video. They could see just before the bomb went off, there's the bomb, there's the package. Rewind, who put the package there? Oh, that guy. And at that point, it's just a matter of finding the video of that guy getting there. So that was actually done relatively quickly. You know, within 3 days, these guys were identified and I think arrested. One of them was arrested, one of them was killed. Mm-hmm. So that happens very quickly. And I know the analysts that were involved in that case, and it really wasn't as big as most people think it was, although they were collecting all this video, much of it they never went through. What you're asking about, though, are these, typical cases where we have riot investigations, where we have an event at a core, let's say Portland. Everybody down there has an evidence collection device, right? Every single person on the street, hundreds, maybe thousands, are recording video. Sometimes they're uploading it to social media. Sometimes they're just keeping it and showing it to friends. So those are all eyewitnesses that are collecting video data. There's also in-car video, body-worn video, CCTV from everywhere you can imagine. So you literally are looking at thousands of hours of video. How do you collate that information? So if we go back to, I'll tell you a very quick, brief story. If we go back to 1994, Vancouver had a riot based on the Vancouver Canucks were in the Stanley Cup Finals. They lost, so there was a riot in Vancouver. I was doing the video analysis. I had 100 hours of video, all VHS. That's it. So it was easy for me to manage. We ended up identifying 104 people, convicted everybody. That, demonstrated the value of video evidence. Now, flash forward 17 years, 2011, Vancouver is in the Stanley Cup Finals again, and the whole playing field changed completely. Everything was digital. Everybody had a camera. The police seized 5,000 hours of video, not just 100 hours. That now became a massive undertaking. So I was asked to put together a video analysis team to process that video. I was fortunate enough to work with Leva, and we put together about 52 certified video analysts who came to one facility that was properly set up to handle this kind of evidence. We spent 2 weeks, 24/7, 3 shifts, and we processed 5,000 hours of video. At that time, it still was a very hands-on sort of process. We had 500 different video sources. Every one of them still went through that research project, how to play it. Today, Input Ace really was built to service that need. After that experience we had in 2011, we said we need a better way. So what we have today, you can bring in thousands of hours of video from all your different sources, throw it into your project in Input Ace, and now Input Ace will manage it. You can search for people with different colored clothing, guns, locations based on GPS information. You can then collate that quickly. I think if I had a tool like Input Ace back then, rather than having 52 video analysts working 24/7 for 2 weeks, I could have probably had 2 or 3 people looking at it for a week, and it would have been done.
Really? That few?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because it's all automated now, and because we don't have to go through that research process, how to play it. It plays, we play everything. Plus the databasing process, the ability to identify, track people by clothing description, height, and a number of other things. The system can very easily collate all that information and then spit out, here's a person, an hour earlier at this location. Hey, that same person is, over here an hour later at a different location, same clothing, but committing different crimes. So with all that information, we can very easily put together little packages that track a suspect's movement. And that kind of is the power of that kind of an organizational tool.
Okay. Because I teach at the University of Toronto and in the forensic sciences program. So there's often students that, are curious about different disciplines. And, I can tell you for sure, forensic video analysis, there's not a lot of big emphasis on something like that. And it actually, could be a class at university. I could see that growing into something because of the opportunities that are there. I know that the Toronto Police recently put together a small team, and the proliferation of video, you need more people to look at this stuff. But I'm curious about what areas that you see that may need, for example, research or development, or what areas do you see are like the open doors that people need to start pushing forward through?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question, Eugene.
Is it?
That's a question I want to ask you. I mean, you're sort of on the cutting edge of all of these, really helpful applications. I know you're doing, blood spatter and trajectory. A lot of that is video related. Working on 3D applications for investigations. I think that's kind of where it's going, and as I said, I would ask you that question.
Yeah, I'm curious. The term, everybody's talking about this artificial intelligence now, where computers are starting to pick stuff out of, the video and images and that sort of thing. And I'm almost, going back to the Boston bombing thing or the riots, right? Or even if you have a suspect and you've captured it in 5, 6, 7, 8, different video cameras, if there might be an opportunity there in the future for, the piece of intelligence, let's call it artificial intelligence, to sort of piece this together for you, what the person would manually sit there for hours, tweaking.
Right. So here's the interesting part about that is that the artificial intelligence, AI, technology that's out there, some of them are pretty sophisticated tools and are pretty good. I want to track this person, track this face, know if there's an object placed in this, pixel area. But here's the frailty of that system is their sources are all proprietary. And so what happens is these management systems, these engines that do artificial intelligence have to have their source video in one format. And so all these other proprietary video sources have to first be transcoded. That's changing from one format to another so that these AI systems can read it. So we're seeing that. We're actually partnering with companies that are doing AI. The reason they're partnering with us is because they want all this proprietary video transcoded into a single source losslessly. And why is that important? Is because if you're tracking something that is red, how do you know it's really red? Does it keep the same redness if it's been transcoded incorrectly or with some compression? Shape and size of objects. If it's being transcoded incorrectly, the shape and size will be changed. And so a truck or a minivan will no longer look like a minivan if it's squished or if it's stretched. Timing issues are critically important for AI. So if a video is being transcoded incorrectly, timing issues are created. And so what Input Ace does is Input Ace, there's a technology called Viz that we have partnered with Axon and with other large companies that are providing their clients with the ability to look at the raw information on their systems without having to have proprietary players, without having to transcode. Mm. So I think that these AI systems are dependent on ensuring that what they're looking at has not been altered or changed. Otherwise, the credibility, the integrity of their technology is going to be lost.
Okay. What are some of the biggest pitfalls that you've seen over the years that sort of just keep coming back, and you're, maybe the things you say, I wish people would just, you fill in the blank. What would that be?
Yeah, recovery. Just the way that police investigators are going to a scene, not respecting video as a science, just thinking that what I see is what I get. Picture's worth 1,000 words. It's the silent witness. They just get a copy and they think they're done. How do they get that copy? That is the primary problem. A lot of the investigators who don't understand video, haven't had a video class, go to a crime scene, ask the owner, hey, can I get a copy of your video? The owner has no clue about forensics. They push a button that says export. Well, that export process is a transcoding process in most cases. So it does change color, shape, size, timing. So that's one of the most frustrating pieces. Conversely, or as we go down the road to trial, that poor exhibit is misinterpreted and is being used by prosecutors in criminal and civil proceedings, by plaintiffs, incorrectly. And they're presenting it to a judge or jury, and the video is not at all representative of what actually occurred in front of the camera. So it starts with the acquisition and then the interpretation, and that's the most frustrating part about what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting when I speak to forensic video analysts, because there's like no standards. There's no, and you get all these proprietary formats. it amazes me how much these guys have to remember. I say guys, these people have to remember, because it's like, yeah, this codec or this thing, you have to know this, that, the only way you can pull something out of it is to do this, or there's so many different things. And so I guess that's another advantage of having a good piece of software or something that kind of brings it all together, that helps you with all those different formats and all the different, being able to get under the hood or behind, inside the guts of the video to start, tearing things apart.
Well, the duty really, Eugene, is to do no harm, right? To look at the video as it was recorded, as it was intended to be examined. That's the number one thing. And so even an investigator doesn't have to be a video expert to gain, advantage from the video information. They might want it to, identify where their victims were, to identify where their witnesses, were standing, so they could validate their observations. They don't need an expert to assist them with that. If they're trying to do something like photographic video comparison, height identification, speed analysis, they absolutely should look to get expertise from an investigator, or from an expert, pardon me. If they're simply trying to look at the video, the goal is do no harm, and then move that exhibit through the process. That doesn't require a lot of training. I have a 2-day class. My class is designed for people who have never taken a video class before, but who work with video evidence every day. Every single investigator, basically. So every detective who works major crime or property crimes, assault cases, they work with video all the time. They should understand how to spell video and to do no harm. But again, any of the kind of expertise, the work that you do, if they want to do ballistics or anything like that, now they should move it forward to an expert.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And in terms of training, there's obviously, there's the investigators or the police that maybe need some frontline training or some, 2-day training or whatever. What about people who want to know more? What about people who really want to get serious about forensic video analysis? What are the options for them to obtain and become proficient at this area?
Well, there's 2 things. If they want to be certified as a forensic video analyst, look to leva.org. Leva, the certification program is excellent. It takes, between 3 to 4 years to get through. It's a very, very serious program. There are other certification programs out there. We call them certification mills. You take no classes. You pay $140, $160, and they'll send you a certificate in the mail. You're a certified video analyst. That, of course, is, not the way to go. You get the letters after your name, but that's just you'll get killed in court if you ever go anywhere. I don't recommend them. Okay. If you are an investigator and you don't want to spend the rest of your career as a certified video analyst, then go to the inputace.com and look at the training there, or go to my website, forensicvideosolutions.com. There are training programs. They're 2-day programs. Those are hands-on, designed specifically to help an investigator do the basics of moving their case quickly through the process. They'll learn how to spell video. They're not going to be an analyst, but really it's the basics of what I, as a police officer, if I'm doing work on video for my casework, it's the minimum information that I would want to have.
Okay. Now, Grant, you work significantly on evaluation of video evidence for use of force investigations. What does that mean if you have to explain it to somebody?
Well, I mean, just look at what's happening in the media today. Don't even start with George Floyd, go all the way back to Rodney King, and all the other cases in between. This just underscores that, every case that we are seeing today of allegations of police use of force is usually attached to video evidence somewhere. And I have been, swamped since George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. I've been swamped by agencies primarily that have to go back and re-examine these kinds of cases where there's video evidence. So a lot of agencies have come to me and say, hey, we had a shooting 3 years ago. It's now come back up because of these events. We want to make sure it was investigated correctly at that time. And so I'm working with cold cases. I'm working with current cases. And I think that pretty much every police shooting that I've seen on the media today has come across my desk to ensure that it's been accurately interpreted and then to assist the investigators moving forward. So I'm not a use of force investigator. I don't opine on anything to do with force, except my job is to assist those investigators to ensure their video that they're examining is accurate, that if they're relying on timing, that they're relying correctly on that timing, and positioning, and some of the 3D issues that we've talked about.
Yeah, okay. Last question. You've been doing this for some time. So what's next for Grant Fredericks? What area interests you? What are you going to get into? And how long are you going to be doing it for?
Oh boy. I want to retire, but I'm not. No, I am going to continue teaching. It's something that I think that I can contribute to this community. I think that I have an obligation to help spread the word about interpretation and the importance of it. So I'll be involved primarily in teaching. I will continue to do casework just so I can stay relevant, continue to maintain my research, and we'll be attending court. It will, my hope is that things will slow down as I continue to move more toward, consulting to ensure that, these kinds of cases are being processed correctly, for court. One of the issues really quick, Eugene, is just the presentation in court. A lot of court systems, courtrooms don't have adequate display technology. And so I published a report on, what kinds of display technologies should be used in a court. And when I go to court now, I always send forward to my client this written publication on standards for presentation in court. And it gets to how large your displays should be, what kind of displays you should be using. And I've assisted many judges in their efforts to improve the video presentation systems in their courts. And I'm really surprised, pleasantly, that these judges really welcome this information because they had no idea. They had no idea that when they use the wrong video displays or projectors, they're missing video evidence. They're changing the shape of objects. They're changing the color. They're changing the pixel relationship of edge pattern. And I demonstrate how that's impacting their cases, and their eyes go, wait, what? So they quickly, they're evolving their courtrooms into proper forensic video display environments.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're dealing with something visual. There's nothing worse than getting, you can see it, better on your screen, and then you're right there in the boot in the box going, I can see it here, but you can't even make out the person in the video, right? Yeah, no.
Well, you and I worked on a shooting case down in South Carolina, and the court was horrible. They had a horrible display, and we had to, explain to the jury why they weren't seeing all the visual evidence.
Yeah, and that's the sad part and that's who loses out, right? It's the jury, right? They're the ones that have to understand this, and they have to be able to see it clearly. And if it can't be shown, then who knows what they're thinking, or who knows, if a decision is going to be made on crappy looking video. Right. So, well, look, Grant, I want to say thank you so much. I appreciate your time here. You're a wealth of knowledge, a pillar in the industry for sure. Do me a favor. I'm just going to make a quick announcement. Hang back. Don't just leave just yet. I'll come back and just chat with you later.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, folks. Well, that does it for this episode. Again, just to close out here today, the conference for the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysis, that's going to be November 16th to 20th. Make sure you go to their site, iabpa.org. And if you're interested in attending, or if you're just interested in submitting an abstract, make sure you do that. Also, next week, I'm going to be having Dr. Laura Fulginiti, who is a forensic anthropologist at the Maricopa County Office of the Medical Examiner. And she's been involved in a lot of cases. She has a wealth of experience as well. So if you're interested in forensic anthropology, make sure you're here next week. On that note, thank you very much, everyone. And I wish you a great day. Take care.